If you're so smart, why are you so alone? Ah, there it is. The stab disguised as a question. The polite insult older deep thinkers hear all the time. Because apparently, intelligence is only valid if it comes with lunch invitations and a group chat. Well, welcome, friend, especially if you've ever felt that the clearer you see, the fewer people want to sit with you at dinner. This is Buddhist wisdom for the elderly, where we speak softly, carry no stick, and still get mistaken for dangerous. If you're new here, hit that like button, subscribe, and help us crawl toward 1,000 subscribers so we can keep making these videos, because somebody has to light the lanterns for the lonely wise ones. In today's video, we're not just venting, we're revealing. Each section explores a hard truth. The phrase society uses to shame clarity, why it stings, the deeper story behind it, and a way to carry that truth with humor instead of heaviness. And if you only watch one part, make it part 7, the intelligent villain. Because once you understand why people turn wisdom into threat, you'll finally stop apologizing for seeing clearly. These aren't just ideas. They're lessons hiding in your daily life, subtle, sacred, often ignored. But not today. Pull up a chair. The tea's warm. The truth might be too. Part 1. The mirror effect. Why awareness feels like an attack. Walk into a room with a little too much awareness, and something curious happens. You don't even need to speak. Just exist with calm, grounded presence, and the atmosphere shifts. Someone fidgets, another cracks a joke with nervous laughter, a third looks at you like you've forgotten your costume at a masquerade. You didn't insult anyone. You didn't challenge their beliefs or critique their lifestyle. And yet, discomfort blooms. This is the mirror effect. Not because you're holding up a literal mirror, but because the clarity in you reflects what others work hard to bury. You unintentionally highlight the tension in their smiles, the weight behind their small talk, the performance in their daily lives. Not with words, just by being real. When someone enters a room with a Rolex or flawless skin, people react with curiosity or envy. But when someone carries a certain stillness, the kind that comes from paying attention to life rather than escaping it, it hits differently. You're not reminding them of who they want to become. You're reminding them of what they've avoided becoming. This isn't vanity, it's spiritual contrast. And spiritual contrast is rarely welcomed. In Buddhism, there's no greater invitation to suffering than sudden clarity. We think awakening brings peace, and it does. But first, it brings friction. Because the light doesn't just shine, it exposes. The presence of someone thoughtful often feels like judgment, even when it's not. It forces people inward, and most are not ready to look inside. You're too intense, you're overthinking it. Can't you just enjoy yourself? These aren't questions, they're camouflage. What they're really saying is, your depth makes me feel shallow. Please stop being a reminder. And as we grow older, this only intensifies. When you're young and observant, you're seen as bright. When you're older and honest, you're labeled bitter. You say something grounded, they label it negative. You offer insight, they call it killing the mood. The truth? You're not the problem. You're just past the phase where pretending feels necessary. You've stopped competing, stopped seeking validation in applause or decoration. And that unsettles people who still think happiness is something you can curate with matching towels. But let's make something clear. This effect, this silent provocation, you're not causing it. You're not the flame. You're the breeze that shows them their candle was never really lit. You're not attacking them. They're reacting to a presence that no longer needs their approval. And that's okay. You're not here to soothe everyone's denial. You're here to be true, to live from the marrow, to walk through the world like someone who's finally learned to breathe through discomfort, not avoid it. So if your words fall flat in shallow circles, let them. If people ghost you when you speak with clarity, wave them off like leaves in autumn. You're not too much. You're simply tuned differently. And some radios were never meant to catch your signal. Part 2. Your brain isn't built for truth. It's built for tribe. Let's clear something up. Your mind, clever as it may be, wasn't designed to seek truth. It was built to not get kicked out of the circle. Thousands of years ago, being left behind didn't just mean missing dinner. It meant being dinner. You could meditate under the stars all you liked, but if the group didn't want you around, You were one unlucky monsoon away from becoming tiger food. So your nervous system evolved a strategy. Don't stand out. Don't question the group. Don't think too loudly. That instinct is still running, like a dusty old operating system that never got the wisdom upgrade. Now picture this. You enter a room calmly, maybe with some earned stillness behind your eyes. No rush to impress, no need to perform. And suddenly, the temperature changes. People fidget. They avoid your gaze. Someone nervously comments on the weather for the fourth time. Why? Because on some level, you've just broken the spell. You didn't insult anyone. You didn't challenge the conversation. You simply didn't join the performance. And that, to a fragile ego, is treason. Modern life runs on invisible scripts. Laugh here, nod there. Pretend that Cheryl's third engagement is inspiring. When someone shows up untethered to these rhythms, it rattles the hive. You didn't bring chaos, you brought presence. And that, ironically, is more destabilizing than any argument. From a Buddhist perspective, this is classic ego territory. The ego doesn't fear death, it fears irrelevance. So when you arrive centered, curious, unwilling to play along with superficial roles, you activate something primal in others. Who invited this person who isn't pretending? And it gets more obvious with age. You stop chasing trophies. You lose interest in petty approval. You begin speaking with the kind of honesty that doesn't blink. People don't know what to do with that. They're used to conversation as camouflage, not connection. You're showing up unarmored. They're still duct taping smiles to their insecurities, so you feel like an alien. Not because you are, but because you've outgrown the costume party. And then comes the twist. In group settings, certainty sells better than depth. Loud opinions get rewarded. Surface-level charm wins. Meanwhile, thoughtful silence is misread as disapproval, or worse, arrogance. The world doesn't dislike deep people. It misunderstands their pacing. Intelligence doesn't just challenge ideas, it threatens roles. When someone stops nodding along, others lose their cues, and the social script crashes. You're not being excluded for being wrong. You're being avoided for disrupting the illusion of consensus. The tribal brain doesn't want insight, it wants reassurance. And when reassurance isn't available, it settles for distraction. So what do you do if you're no longer interested in playing along? You stay rooted. You become the mountain, not the echo. You learn to recognize when your clarity is being mistaken for danger, and you stop apologizing for it. Part 3. Why simplicity wins in a world addicted to distraction. Modern life runs on noise. Not the kind that comes from traffic or construction. No, this noise is quieter and far more dangerous. It hums beneath every conversation. It scrolls endlessly in your palm. It lives inside apps with gentle pings that train your brain to crave breadcrumbs. And here's the strange part. The simpler the message, the louder the applause. Say something profound, you'll confuse half the room and bore the other half. Say something shallow, rhythmic, and upbeat, suddenly you're wise. Inspirational. A brand. It's not that people can't handle depth, they just don't have the stamina for it anymore. We live in a culture of immediate gratification and zero buffering. If a sentence takes more than 5 seconds to understand, it's labeled unclear. If a thought requires effort, it's replaced with a meme. Algorithms understand this better than we do. They don't reward nuance, they reward engagement. And what drives engagement? Not insight, outrage, shock, flattery, distraction disguised as connection. So if you've ever wondered why genuine wisdom doesn't go viral, there's your answer. It asks too much, it doesn't flatter. And worst of all, it makes people think. That's the kiss of death on the internet. Thinking doesn't monetize well. This is why so many thoughtful voices remain invisible. Not because they lack value, but because they don't conform to the dopamine economy. You can write a beautiful reflection on impermanence. Or you can scream into your phone about how your ex was a narcissist and get 1 million views. Guess which one trends? From a Buddhist point of view, this is textbook samsara. The world spins in circles chasing illusion, clinging to stimulation, avoiding silence. And the more distracted the mind becomes, the more it fears stillness. Because stillness doesn't offer a reward, it offers a mirror. Now imagine being someone who's spent decades unlearning this madness. You've stopped playing the game, you've watched the curtain drop, you know the difference between presence and performance. And then you're expected to explain yourself in 15 seconds with upbeat background music. It's like asking a Zen monk to deliver the Dharma through interpretive dance. But here's the cosmic joke. Simplicity isn't the enemy. True simplicity, the kind that arises from clarity, is sacred. What the world celebrates, though, isn't simplicity, it's reduction. Boiling everything down until nothing meaningful remains. Replacing reflection with reaction, turning wisdom into a slogan and calling it accessible. This affects elders more than anyone. You've lived through enough chaos to see patterns. You've learned the hard way what matters and what doesn't. But when you speak, the world responds with blank stares or phone glances. You're told to keep it light, make it quick, don't go too deep. As if your experience is too dense to digest. As if living through decades of war, change, grief, boredom, betrayal, and healing needs a content warning. But here's where your power lives. Let the world chase distraction. Let the masses scroll through static. You don't have to shrink your message to fit a feed. You don't have to dilute your presence to feel included. Say what needs saying, even if no one's listening. Especially then, because truth isn't here to trend, it's here to echo. Part 4. The Archive of Exiles, Why Society Always Silences Its Sharpest Minds. Wisdom rarely gets applause in real time. Say something visionary, and you'll be labeled dramatic. Speak plainly about decay, and you'll be accused of cynicism. Offer clarity, you'll be met with discomfort, not gratitude. Those who notice the cracks are treated like they caused them. Human history isn't shaped by the majority. It's carved by individuals who saw differently and paid for it. Their mistake? Thinking truth was enough. It never is. Insight without timing becomes a threat. And society's reflex to threats? Erase, ridicule, delay. We don't burn thinkers at the stake anymore. We unsubscribe from them. We call them too negative or out of touch. We ghost their wisdom and follow someone who makes better playlists. And once they're gone, really gone, we drag their names back into the light. Suddenly, the ignored thinker becomes a misunderstood genius. Their face lands on a mural. Their warnings get romanticized, stripped of teeth and turned into slogans. There's a pattern to it. Step 1. Marginalize the messenger. Step 2. Survive the consequences of ignoring them. Step 3. Pretend you always agreed. This isn't just about dead philosophers. It happens to older adults, quietly, every single day. Say something rooted in lived experience, and you're called inflexible. Point out the repetition of history, and you're accused of bringing down the mood. Speak with the weight of memory, and they hand you a brochure for Tai Chi. But here's the inconvenient truth. Memory is disruptive. Patterns are dangerous. If you've seen something collapse before, you become a liability to those still pretending it's stable. And so those with clarity are gently pushed aside, not with violence, but with politeness. A different kind of exile. One that wears a smile. Modern exile isn't dramatic, it's subtle. Your calls stop getting returned. Your wisdom is heard but never implemented. Your presence becomes tolerated rather than welcomed. You haven't offended anyone. You've just become inconvenient to the illusion. In Buddhist terms, this is the karma of awareness. The clearer your vision, the harder it becomes to participate in collective denial. And those still inside the dream don't appreciate being woken. They'll say you're bitter. They'll call you complicated. They'll describe your insights as heavy. But what they're really saying is, you've made me think about what I've been avoiding. So you end up in the archive, not because you were irrelevant, but because you refused to play along. The archive isn't dusty shelves and forgotten books. It's living people, sitting quietly in rooms they were once asked to leave. Not for shouting, but for telling the truth too early. But take heart, you're not alone in that space. You're among a long line of souls who outgrew the circus and watched it from the hill. You weren't dismissed because you lacked value. You were sidelined because your clarity arrived before the market was ready. And someday, when the lights flicker and the noise dies down, someone will come looking for the voices that made sense all along. Part 5. Solitude isn't a punishment. It's advanced training. You don't really choose solitude. One day it just shows up at your doorstep wearing sweatpants and holding a bag of spiritual homework. At first, you resist. You think, maybe I'm just going through a phase. Then the phone stops ringing. Then the invitations stop arriving. Then you realize you're actually enjoying eating crackers in silence at 4 p.m. with nobody asking about your retirement plan. That's when it clicks. Oh, This isn't loneliness. This is enlightenment wearing fuzzy socks. In this culture, being alone past 60 is treated like you've failed a group project. People whisper like you've developed a rash. They say things like, you should get out more, as if wisdom is contagious and you're the problem. But solitude isn't a symptom. It's graduation. It means you've stopped auditioning. It means the circus left town and you didn't miss the elephants. Buddhists call it noble silence. But to be fair, they never had Facebook. Solitude today doesn't mean sitting in a cave. It means surviving a Thursday afternoon without checking if someone liked your quote about inner peace. Here's the trick no one tells you. People won't say, wow, you seem deeply content with yourself. They'll say, are you okay? As if joy without witnesses is some kind of breakdown. But you're not broken. You're just tired of pretending to care about casserole recipes and phone upgrades. You're not bitter. You just don't need to fill the silence with weather updates and secondhand gossip about people who peaked in '97. See, solitude isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of pretending. It's finally sitting down at the table of your own mind and not finding a jury there. You stop performing. You start noticing. And slowly, beautifully, you stop trying to be fascinating and start becoming real. Let's not sugarcoat it. Some days are rough. You stare into space, you feel invisible, your houseplant judges you, but even then, especially then, you're learning. Learning how to listen without waiting to talk. Learning how to be whole without witnesses. Learning that your breath is enough company on most days. That's not punishment. That's spiritual boot camp with better snacks. You're not retreating. You're recalibrating. You're not withdrawing. You're expanding inward. In the monastery, they call it deep practice. Outside, it just looks like you're feeding birds and not answering texts. But inside, you're rewriting your soul's manual in pen. The world keeps selling noise, but you've stopped buying. You're no longer seduced by attention. You've got something better. Peace that doesn't need permission. That's terrifying for some, but for you, it's finally home. So if you're sitting alone, wondering if you've been forgotten, let me gently offer this. You're not alone. You're just in a deeper room now. Fewer people, better acoustics. Part 6, the wisdom tax. Why truth carriers get penalized. Quietly. Let's talk about the price of knowing too much. Not taxes, not rent, not the cost of organic yogurt. I mean the invisible bill the universe hands you when you start seeing clearly. It's subtle, quiet, no receipt. You just wake up one day, and suddenly people are dodging your phone calls like you're selling enlightenment door to door. Here's how it works. You've done the work. The peeling, the sitting, the unlearning. You've stared long enough at your own nonsense to recognize it in other people's TED Talks. You've got perspective. And somehow, that makes you suspicious. Not to yourself, to everyone else. When you were anxious and uncertain, they called you relatable. When you were lost and dramatic, they called you interesting. But now, you're calm, you're grounded, you're unbothered by status, trends, and the correct angle for selfie lighting. Now they call you intense. That's the wisdom tax. You don't pay it in cash. You pay it in isolation, misinterpretation, and the occasional unsolicited lecture from someone who read half a mindfulness book and thinks they've cracked the cosmos. People love truth, but only in theory. They'll post quotes from Rumi all day long, but when you actually embody stillness, they start talking to you like you're a threat to the brunch menu. You say, maybe success isn't accumulation. They hear, I'm judging your throw pillows and your salary. You say, pain isn't always a problem. They hear, I'm emotionally unstable and should be avoided at weddings. The moment you stop needing approval, people start offering concern. Are you okay? You seem different. Maybe you just need to get out more. No, Karen, I just stopped building a personality out of coupons and social validation. You realize after a while that people don't respond to what you say. They respond to what you no longer need from them. You no longer mirror their fear. You don't play along with their need to be reassured. And that absence, that silence, it makes people itch. You're not hostile. You've just stopped applauding nonsense. You're not antisocial. You've just run out of interest in debates about brand name vitamins and parking apps. In Buddhist terms, this is what happens when the ego senses it's not in control of the conversation anymore. It panics. And instead of saying, I'm scared, it says, you're weird. Instead of asking questions, it throws labels like darts. And this doesn't stop as you get older. In fact, it gets worse. Because now you've got decades of observation, patience, and painfully earned clarity. You've stopped reacting. You've stopped clinging. You've even stopped caring whether your socks match. And people interpret that as either a mental health crisis or some sort of slow, elegant descent into irrelevance. But you're not irrelevant. You're just free. And freedom terrifies people still paying rent to their ego every morning. You're walking around without the need to impress anyone. That's suspicious. That's dangerous. To the Matrix, you're now unplugged. And worse, you're smiling about it. So what's the move? You keep going, you pay the tax, and you stop expecting a refund. Because the truth is, even if the crowd thins out, the path becomes lighter. You lose some company, you gain yourself. And that's not a punishment. That's the reward. Part 7. The Intelligent Villain. Why society makes smart people the enemy. You ever notice how the villain in every movie is the one who reads? Seriously, give a character a calm voice, a tailored coat, and a vocabulary beyond cereal box slogans, and boom, they're the antagonist. You don't even need context, just a thoughtful pause and some jazz in the background. Suddenly the audience knows, oh no, he thinks. Our culture has a habit of turning intelligence into a threat. Not the kind that builds spaceships, the kind that sits silently in a meeting and doesn't nod along. That's the real danger. Not rebellion, not violence, but the audacity of seeing through the nonsense and saying nothing. And let's be clear, we're not talking about academic trivia. Nobody's upset you can name all the moons of Jupiter. They're upset because you can sit at a family gathering, listen for 5 minutes, and already know where every conversation is going, and why nobody's really saying what they mean. That's villain energy. In this society, deep thought doesn't read as wisdom, it reads as judgment. If you're calm in chaos, they assume you're plotting something. If you question the rules, they assume you're trying to break them. You're not resisting the system, you've just stopped needing it. And that, my friend, is unacceptable. From a Buddhist lens, this is the discomfort of mirror minds. When someone stands in equanimity, it reveals everyone else's flinching. When one person steps out of the performance, it ruins the choreography. They don't hate your clarity. They fear what it might cost them to develop their own. Now let's zoom out for a moment. Look at the pattern. In movies, the wise one always lives in exile, or gets killed off early, or worse, turns evil because nobody listened to them. Why? Because we're more comfortable with brilliance that self-destructs than brilliance that stays centered. Let's take inventory. If you're passionate, you're too much. If you're detached, you're cold. If you're neutral, you're suspicious. And if you're joyful without external validation, they're already dialing someone to check on you. But here's the secret the villains never get to say, because they're usually interrupted by explosions. They were right. Not always about everything, but about the part no one wanted to hear. About the system being broken, about the story being rigged, about the emptiness under the gold. And deep down, everyone knew it. But knowing and admitting are two different spiritual lifetimes. This is the spiritual tax of aging well. You stop pretending the emperor has clothes. You stop arguing with people who don't want truth, just comfort. And somewhere along the way, your presence alone becomes too sharp for rooms full of bubble wrap. You're not cruel, you're clear. And clarity in a foggy world looks like hostility. So what do you do when your awareness gets you cast as the villain? You let it happen. You smile, you water your plants, you write poems in your bathrobe, you become a legend in your own living room. Because the truth isn't here to win a popularity contest. It's here to quietly rearrange reality from the inside out. Let them point fingers. Let them tell the story their way. You'll be the one they quote long after they stop misquoting you. Part 8. The Final Room. Why only a few will understand you, and that's enough. Eventually, you stop trying to be understood by everyone. Not out of arrogance, just exhaustion. You run out of energy for explaining your silence, defending your peace, or justifying why you're not at the party watching people pretend they still enjoy each other. You don't leave with drama. You just slip out the side door and go home. Where the teacups aren't judging you. Where the couch accepts your silence without needing a follow-up text. Here's what no one tells you at the start of your spiritual unfolding. You won't be celebrated. You'll be confusing. You won't be the hero in someone else's story. You'll be the weirdo who suddenly stopped gossiping and started asking questions nobody wanted answered. And if you're lucky, truly lucky, a few beautiful misfits will find you. You'll recognize them by their tired eyes and unbothered posture. They don't flinch when the truth walks in. They don't panic during long silences. They're not trying to fix you. They're trying to be with you. Because they've also left the noisy rooms. They've also traded applause for integrity. They've also decided they'd rather sit alone with a clear mind than sit surrounded by noise pretending to matter. This final room is small, not because others were uninvited, but because most never made it past the mirror. The mirror that shows them the masks they've been wearing. The emptiness of all that chasing. The weight of pretending to be okay in a world that only rewards pretending. From a Buddhist view, this is where the bodhisattvas hang out. Not because they couldn't ascend, but because they stayed to light candles for the next wanderer. Not loud, not proud, just present. The bodhisattva doesn't knock on doors yelling, "You're asleep." They just leave a cup of tea, still warm, for whoever wakes up next. You won't find this room on a map. You won't get a welcome email. There's no loyalty program or branded hoodie. But when you arrive, something shifts. You no longer ask, "Why doesn't anyone get me?" You ask, "Who still needs me to show up quietly and not flinch?" The world keeps spinning. People keep performing. And you learn to smile at it all without joining the dance. Not because you're better, but because the music stopped making sense to your bones. So now when someone doesn't understand you, you bless them and move along. When you speak and no one nods, you stop needing the nod. You start speaking for the sake of the truth, not for the feedback. And you finally realize you weren't meant for every room. You were meant for the right one, even if it only holds 3 chairs. Even if one of those chairs is empty, for someone who hasn't arrived yet. This is the final freedom. No more convincing, no more explaining, no more apologizing for clarity in a fog-loving world. Just tea, stillness, and the kind of laughter that doesn't require an audience. You don't need to be widely understood to be wildly awake. You don't need a crowd. You need a corner of the world where you can sit down, take off the mask, and still be whole. This is that corner. Welcome home. So here we are, at the end of another strange and beautiful walk through the jungle of the mind. Let's recap. We learned that intelligence, when not watered down, makes people squirm. That solitude isn't exile, it's the final upgrade. And that clarity comes with a tax, usually paid in social invitations and the occasional family side-eye. We talked about why deep thinkers often get cast as villains, how society prefers applause over honesty, and why your truth doesn't need a standing ovation, just a steady voice. And if any of this hit home, if you've ever been the quiet one in a noisy world, the listener at a table of performers, the elder who sees through the show but still brings soup, then this space is yours. If you haven't already, click that little subscribe button, not for ego, but so we can keep holding the lantern together. Leave a comment too. Your story might be the mirror someone else needs. And hit like if you believe wisdom gets better with age, not quieter. This has been Buddhist Wisdom for the Elderly. Thank you for sitting with us. And remember, you don't need a crowd to be right. You just need a clean cup, a quiet room, and a truth that doesn't flinch.